Fridays at 3:45, Grayson Grundhoefer joins us on 365 Sports. Grayson, thank you for being here with Paul Craig, and I'm David Smoke. So, was that Baylor going forward what we saw in Lubbock, or was that just a tease?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to come away with at least some level of optimism from what you saw from Baylor as far as, you know, the product they put on the field on Saturday. And, you know, I think I got asked this question earlier this week, and I think the more that I dove into it, the more I've said to myself, okay, that was definitely more about Baylor than it was about Texas Tech. This Baylor team seems to be trending in the right direction with their run game. Their defense has played better over the last 2 weeks, despite playing what I believe to be pretty dang good offenses in Kansas and Texas Tech. So, yeah, I think you're seeing Baylor grow and develop. You're seeing some signs. And I think that if everything comes together, they're going to be a really tough team to beat as things move forward in November.
Grayson, defensively, they 6 sacks, 5 interceptions, I think 5 passes broken up, 8 tackles for loss. That is probably about 3 games combined if you pick the right 3 on some of their worst defensive performances of the year. What do you think turned the light on? Was it just that matchup with the offense that Texas Tech runs, or is it something else?
Yeah, I think they definitely came into the game with a great game plan. You know, you could definitely see that. They made Baron Morton extremely uncomfortable, made him get out of the pocket way sooner than I think the Texas Tech coaches were hoping for. And because of that, it allowed the defense to really get into good position to make plays. And so I do think that it was in part for the scheme. Obviously, Dave Aranda had a great scheme going into it. But I will also say I think the defensive line, as far as their one-on-one matchups, were far more active than they have been in the early part of the season. I mean, TJ Franklin, Gabe Hall, Braden Utley, Apu, I just felt like they were getting more pressure than they have in past games. Also, the jack position with Jackie Marshall and Garmin Randolph, they look tremendous as well. So if those guys can continue to take steps forward, that's really, really going to help them in the long run and help their secondary as well. So I'm very curious as things move forward and they start to face teams that can run the ball better. I'm curious if they're able to adapt and continue to get that kind of pressure, because clearly going into that game against Texas Tech, they did not respect Tech's ability to run the football, and that worked out for them. But as you move forward into this week against Oklahoma and against these other teams you're going to face in Kansas State, TCU, and Texas, you're going to face teams that can really, really run the football and challenge your defensive front in a different way than Tech could.
Grayson, how do you feel about the loss of Drake Dabney for what looks like the rest of the year? Just had surgery this week, and subsequently Kelsey Johnson. I mean, it's not like you just do exactly what Drake Dabney was doing and you're just a replacement in every way, shape, or form. Every player is different, but what do you think that Kelsey Johnson does that helps this team, and where are they going to miss Drake Dabney?
Yeah, so I think they're really going to miss Drake Dabney as far as his polish, right? You know, knowing route depth, knowing what to do when he sees certain coverages. I mean, there are nuances to being a receiver, especially as a tight end. So that's a part of it. I would also say, you know, some of the blocking schemes, I think, you know, maybe will be a little bit tougher for Kelsey to be as effective as Drake. But the one thing I will say is, you know, Kelsey arrived early. He was an early enrollee, so he's had a lot more time than a typical true freshman. And he also has shown flashes throughout the year. He's gotten playing time in multiple games this season, and he's proven himself to be a very good blocker. And so as the season progresses, I expect him to get better and better. He played really well against Texas Tech. So now I'm curious if he can take another step. And obviously he's going to be utilized more as a pass catcher as well. So he's going to have to show some things in that regard. But I have a lot of confidence in Kelsey. He was a guy who I expected to play a lot this season as a true freshman, and that has been true throughout the year. But now he's going to be asked to do even more than that. And I also think, you know, you're going to see Ben Sims be relied upon heavily as well. They're going to be asking him to do a lot more and play a lot more snaps than he has in the early part of the year. And I'd also say keep an eye on Gavin Yates as well, a guy who's played quite a bit during his career at Baylor, and I'm expecting him to take in more of a role as well.
How much has Khalil Keith's return, in your opinion, helped what they're doing on the offensive line?
Massive. I don't think the national media or really anyone that has outside of the people who follow Baylor closely, have really noticed it quite yet. But I think they're going to. And I think Khalil Keith, what he's shown me is just when you watch him hit a defensive lineman, it's just different. He's driving guys backwards. He's getting to the second level. And Gavin Byers has been awesome this year, but Khalil definitely brings a little bit more, especially in the run game. And so I'm very intrigued to see as his snaps continue to grow and grow, to see just how much better he can be. Because against Kansas, it was pretty much 50%. Against Texas Tech, it was still maybe a little bit more than that, but still right around that number. So I'm curious going into this Oklahoma game if his conditioning and, just if he's in shape enough to play, maybe 80% of the snaps, the kind of impact he can have. Because I think it could be a very big one. He's a very talented player, a guy who many people, including the Baylor coaching staff, believe to be an NFL prospect. So getting a guy like that back, I think it's huge for this team as November rolls on.
Grayson, if I were to take the old school overhead projector and put the little clear diagram of the Texas Tech offense and then maybe put over the next one of Oklahoma, it would probably overlap pretty well. Would it be a fool's errand to think that last week bodes well for this week, or with what we've seen from this Baylor team, do we have to kind of take each week individually?
Yeah, no, I actually think this Oklahoma offense is extremely different than Texas Tech. And the main reason is because Oklahoma's offensive line is actually really good. And that is not something I can say about Texas Tech's offensive line. When you watch Oklahoma play in the games that they've had Dylan Gabriel, they're able to move people in the run game. And they really have made a strong, I think they've made a focus for themselves to, hey, you know what? We need to run the football. We need to protect our defense a little bit. And so we need to get physical up front. And you're seeing that from them. Eric Gray, their running back, has had a fantastic season. They're going to rely on him heavily. And you're not going to see a team that's just going to go out there and start throwing it all over the place like Tech did. I think Oklahoma's going to try to run the football, try to test the Baylor front, while also taking some shots in the passing game, of course. And I think that's going to force Baylor to probably put an extra guy in the box, or at least force Baylor to respect the run more than it had to against that Texas Tech team. So I think that's the key difference, is the Sooners' ability to run the football. I just think it's very unique than what they saw against Texas Tech. I'll also say I think Oklahoma's receivers are better as well. When you're talking about Marvin Mims and Theo Weiss and Jaleel Farouk and Braden Willis, they have more weapons who I think are a little more proven and a little more experienced than Tech. So I think it's going to be a real challenge for sure for this Baylor secondary and for the defensive line against what I believe to be a very good offense. And if you get rid of those games in which Dylan Gabriel, missed time or didn't play, Oklahoma's 5-1 and they're averaging 40 points per game, which would put them top 10 in the nation. So they are a very good offense, and one that, like I said, they're going to test this Baylor secondary and this Baylor defense as a whole.
Yeah, and that run game includes Dylan Gabriel, too. I mean, he'll definitely get out there and scoot if he needs to. Grayson, that was a big recruiting weekend for Texas Tech. I mean, we know all the pageantry, or at least the buildup and everything that was going on at this point ad nauseum. But, we didn't really hit on how big of a recruiting weekend that was, because it was theirs for one. But what do you think that did, if anything, for Baylor to go there at their place in front of some crossover prospects and go win? Do you think that has any sort of an impact, so to say, in recruiting, momentum, things like that?
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those things. Baylor's been able to show, hey, we won a Big 12 championship with Dave Aranda. Dave Aranda developed guys, got them to a Big 12 championship, not only got them there, won it. Then went to the Sugar Bowl, played an SEC team, won it. Like, they're going out and winning games. They're not having to sit there and say, hey, this is what we could be. This is what we can do if you come here. No, it's more like, this is who we are. We just want you to be a part of that. And that's huge when you make that transition, because when you're able to show actual facts of, hey, we went out and won this game by however many points, that's a big deal. So when a recruit goes to visit Baylor and that recruit's between Baylor and Texas Tech, and Baylor's able to show, hey, 45-17 in Lubbock, I mean, that's a big deal. And I mean, I'm not going to say that that's going to win you every recruiting battle, because it's not, but at least it's just another step getting closer towards Baylor being able to say, hey, we're the premier program in the state of Texas, and look at these wins that we have against the schools in Texas, which is going to, again, show up again in a couple weeks when they play TCU and at the end of the year against Texas. Baylor needs to continue to find ways to win those games. And in the case against TCU, they need to find a way to win that specific game because they've struggled over the years beating that TCU team. So I think it's very helpful. Again, I'm not going to say, oh, this is the end-all, be-all, but it's very nice for Baylor to continue to show these kind of wins against schools that they recruit against.
So what do they need, and what kind of Blake Shapen do they need on Saturday, tomorrow in Norman to win?
Yeah, so for me, I think this goes back to, the games that we've been able to watch where he's been in control of the offense. And to me, the games that I look at when I'm really diving deep into it is the game against Iowa State and the game against Texas Tech. Those two road games, and you could throw in the West Virginia game. The only reason I wouldn't, though, is because of that one just costly turnover. I know he played great outside of that, but that turnover really flipped the game, the fumble that was returned for a touchdown. So I really focused on that Iowa State game and then the Texas Tech game because he was in control of the offense. The moment never got too big for him. He was completing the easy passes and then also completing some deep shots. And his receivers made some plays as well. But in general, it was a lot of Blake Shapen, putting the ball where his receivers could make plays. And he needs to do that this weekend against Oklahoma because, in my opinion, Oklahoma's not going to be able to stop Baylor from running the football. So the only way I think they're going to be able to stop Baylor is if Blake Shapen is either inaccurate or turning the football over. So if he can avoid those two things, then I think Baylor's going to have a great chance to score 40-plus points against Oklahoma this weekend. And a number that I pointed out a little bit earlier in this week, but when Baylor rushes for over 170 yards this year, they're 4-0, and they're averaging nearly 48 points per game. So keep an eye on that 170 yards on the ground number.
Yeah, what Richard Reese is doing is really amazing for someone who's somewhat diminutive, but he's tough and he's had a great run. So among all the players who are committed to Baylor, and there's a large chunk of them, we hear a lot about Austin Novosad and what he's doing at Dripping Springs, the great win against Lake Travis, 2 weeks ago or so. Washington at Franklin, among others. Pendergrass at Mineola. Is there one that's kind of jumped out at you that might be having even a better year than you thought?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know what? I'm going to go with, I think, kind of an under the radar maybe story that kind of appeared, and I just kind of found out about it this week. I knew this particular player was having a great season, and I knew he was helping lead his team to a great year. But Corey Kelly at Clear Falls, really impressive what he's doing, and the reason I say that is because this is the first time in their school's history they've won the district. And they're 9-1, and he's been a huge part of that. Has had multiple double-digit tackle games, has a lot of sacks, and so I need to give him a shout-out because he's been so good all year. He's a big part of their recruiting class, the guy that I have ranked nearing that 4-star territory. He's probably going to get there after this season just based on what I've seen. Very versatile defensive end prospect who also kind of fits into that Jack mold, and just a great athlete, and one who I don't think many people talk about because obviously he's a defensive player and he's on a good football team, but he's been a huge part in their kind of turnaround, their success this year. So Corey Kelly, definitely a guy that's had a great year. And there's obviously many others. You mentioned a few of them. DK Kalu at Ridge Point is another one that's had a magnificent season as well. So yeah, I think those are a couple that I would definitely keep my eye on if you're a Baylor fan. I do look towards the high school playoffs that are coming up very soon.
In fact, they start a week from last night, Thursday of next week. Great stuff. Grayson Grundhoefer, SicEm365.com, recruiting coordinator, analyst, and also college football analyst, co-host of the Bearcast with Craig that's released every Tuesday. When we come back,